when was the moment that you started learning about climate change as a social justice issue and not just a scientific issue? And did you have any breakout moments or really impactful moments that showed you the gravity of climate change?
I started working in multimedia in Kenya and around East Africa and doing stories on people that their lives are more tied to like the land and to the environment. Say, for example, like pastoralists or herders, and seeing how someone that herds goats, and they would very, strongly argue that climate change is real. And that's not an exaggeration. If you go out and talk to, say, like some Samburu herders or something in northern Kenya, they'll talk to you about climate change because their whole lives depend on rains, weather patterns, where things are, where vegetation is growing. And or just even an Uber driver in Nairobi would say, oh, the rainy season is coming at a different time every year, and that things aren't the way they used to be. And so that's when that's when it started to become more apparent that the people that are less well off, that have contributed the least amount to climate change, are the ones that are being most affected by it. I guess a good example of this was over the summer, I went and did a story on the locust invasions in northern Kenya. And I mean, this is the most remote part of the country, kind of the Ethiopia, Kenya, like border area. You have all these these pastoralist tribes. And, you had this whole, it's this whole weird, you had heavy rains in Saudi Arabia, which had the locusts come over to East Africa, the worst locust swarms in like 70 years. And so these people were directly having, their animals were dying, their farms were being destroyed, they're directly being affected by climate change. And, they have, minuscule carbon footprints compared to you and me, who fly around the world and, eat imported foods and buy clothes that are shipped from abroad, whereas these people, live very much subsistence lifestyles. So that's when it started to see, tangible examples of climate change is just not just an environmental issue, but a social justice issue.
How do you think that, like, learning about this in high school, or how do you think that education can kind of bring this message also to U.S. students? Like, do they have to go to Kenya in order to learn this, or how can teachers, or what would you say to teachers and educators?
Well, I'd like to think that maybe, and this is just going off of the messaging we've been seeing coming out of UNEP and other reports and other organizations, is I'm hoping I'd like to think that the messaging is starting to change. When I was in high school, it was very much, we got this kind of these scientific answers. You get a map showing, ice sheets melting, or like a graph showing sea level rise, but you would never really see the human element of it. And so and that just goes with how much more of a important topic it's become. But for us, it was always taught in this kind of abstract scientific sort of way. Whereas now, it's becoming apparent how much because it's happening and it's starting to affect people. And so I think now what's important is to teach, that how it's affecting people, who it's affecting, who is the worst affected by climate change. And also to show, especially, students in places like in the United States, that we're relatively privileged when it comes to climate change, at least for now. Obviously, that's hard to say in California, where you have wildfires and stuff like that, but we still have the money to deal with these disasters, in a sense, to drive away from the fires or to rebuild our houses after stuff happens. Whereas, people in, say, like Bangladesh, where they're just getting pummeled by monsoons every year, they don't have the privileges that we have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is like the role of education and imparting competencies into students? What do you think are some of the main like competencies that the next generation needs in order to deal with it?
I think just what the next generation needs is more of an awareness of how everything they do is like linked to the outside world. Because say you're in high school or college and you're just ordering, say you're ordering clothes online, and you're not thinking about where it's made or the carbon footprint it has. You're eating fast food hamburgers and you don't care because you're 18 and whatever. So I think the most important thing is to kind of educate students that the choices they make and what they do does have an impact, and show that the choices they start making now, it not only, obviously if I eat one less burger, the effect is minuscule, but by making these choices, it's influencing the behavior of others. It's sending a message to your parents, to older people that have a harder time changing their minds. So I guess the most important thing to show students is the choices, the decisions they make matter and have a larger effect outside of themselves and their like small personal bubble.
Cool. And from your work at UNEP, what have you learned about communicating climate change in a way that inspires people to actually act?
It's difficult. That's one thing, because unfortunately it becomes a political issue. It's hard, you can only bash certain countries so much. You can only say certain messages so many times before people become numb to it. And so that's the challenge we find, is that there's always reports coming out and they're always saying a lot of times similar things, but it's finding new ways to phrase stuff, new angles, new things to get people motivated. Because if you just keep saying the same facts over and over again, people start to feel hopeless. And it is a grim situation. It's a pretty dire situation. But the last thing you want is for people to think, oh, I've seen this fact a million times. If you keep saying the same fact over and over again, people go, all right, that's just going to happen. Nothing I can do about it. So it's finding new ways, whether that be, more visual, it's interacting with the media, getting the media to kind of change their tone, just finding new ways to engage people and get them to care. And I think outside of UNEP, a good thing to like a lot of media houses have started taking on more urgent language. Like the Guardian, they made that conscious decision, I think it was about a year and a half ago, to change their language, to go from, it was like, calling it a climate emergency. That was the direct word choice they made. And now everyone refers to it as a climate emergency, maybe outside of Fox News or something, but it's become a much more common term because they're making these deliberate choices to reframe it as an emergency that's affecting all of us that we need to act on.
What would you say to youth to, on one hand, try to like quell eco anxiety, and on the other hand, inspire them to take action?
Well, I'll tell them. I remember when I was like in middle school, in elementary school, reading what was like National Geographic Kids or something, and having some form of the same thing, being like really freaked out about the environment and being really concerned, and like, and it's gotten worse since I was a kid. So it's one of those things that, I guess the only thing that can make you feel better is to, instead of feeling anxious and just feeling hopeless about it, is to try to do something. And I feel like I don't really need to say that, because the younger generations now are the ones out doing Fridays for Future and marching and doing a lot more than my generation really has. I mean, say I'm a millennial, and so Gen Z, they're already taking a lot more action than previous generations have. And I guess the issue with eco anxiety is you can't really get rid of it, in a sense. I mean, I think, unless you really are, a climate change denier, I think we all have it to some degree. Sometimes I just get really bummed out. I'll get really bummed out some days about, I'll read something about, Amazon deforestation, and I feel like, dang, like there's nothing we can do. And then other days you turn around and you break down and you get like a hamburger when you're at a restaurant. So it's these, it's this kind of roller coaster of actions and feelings in what you do. So I guess the best thing is to try to not become too consumed by that anxiety, and instead focus on channeling that into making positive changes about stuff. So instead of I shouldn't be feeling anxious about, global warming. I should feel maybe some anxiety like, that wasn't good of me. I went out and got a burger last night. Maybe, I need to work on myself and be better at stuff like that and, make smarter choices. But that's a
Yeah,
tough
it
one. Yeah.
reminds me of that quote that's like, if you want to change the world, change yourself. Like, you
Hmm.
know, or like yesterday I was smart, so I tried to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm trying to change myself. Like looking inward and starting with yourself is always,
Exactly.
it's all you can do.
Yeah. It's all you can do. I mean, I enjoy what I do enjoy, like for UNEP is that sometimes working for like a big organization like that, it feels like there's so much bureaucracy. Like, oh, what am I like really doing? But at the end of the day, when I really just break it down, I'm making, pro environment advertising is like the most simplest terms because we're not selling anything. It's really just like messaging about the environment, environmental issues or success stories. So that kind of makes me happy. So if you can also find a way to work in something that is going, kind of furthering a positive agenda, pro environment agenda, I think that's good.